Hi everybody, I'm Mark Backler and I'm going to be talking to you about getting your dream job in the games industry. I'll start off just by giving you a little bit of a background about myself. So I've been working in the games industry for about 11 years now. I first started off by studying games computing at Lincoln University, which kind of had a whole range of different units from maths and programming, 3D modelling to game design and animation. Then a friend of mine had applied to Electronic Arts and got a job as a level integrator on Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. I felt like I wasn't ready to apply for jobs yet, so I was working on my portfolio, but when he got the job there and told me that they were hiring for more of the same position, and I knew he had the same degree I did, so I was definitely qualified for the job. I applied. I thought my interview went really terribly, but actually it turned out I got the job. So yeah, I was very lucky to have that role and start picking up so much experience on the job. It was really cool working on a Harry Potter game. And I think the moral of the story there is like the Michael Jordan quote of "you miss 100% of the shots you don't take." So yeah, you've just got to start applying for stuff, probably even before you feel you're ready, because otherwise you could just be polishing your portfolio and CV forever. But make sure you put in a good bit of work to begin with, then start sending it off, and then you can keep sort of improving it and sending it other places in future and just keep iterating. So then that working at EA was a contract which kept getting extended, but then when the game was done I was looking for work, so I had heard that Lionhead were hiring, so I'd applied there and managed to get a job as a scripter, so using Lua, the scripting language, and working on Fable 2 was the job. And so I was sort of scripting the quests in the game, which was really good fun. Then I went on to be a designer on Fable the Journey and worked on Milo and Kate as well. I also worked at Kuju Knickknack on some different children's games. I was at Sony very briefly, and then worked at Marmalade as a lead designer on some Hasbro mobile titles. And then I left Marmalade after having started a Game Jam game for the Ludum Dare Game Jam when the theme was minimalism, so it was quite a while ago. I think it was 7 years ago now, and yeah, so I had been working on it in my spare time. I was offered some funding, and so I quit my job to work on the game full time. And it's actually releasing tomorrow now for me. For you guys, when you watch this, it should be out already. Um, so yeah, there's this great quote from Calvin Coolidge of "Nothing in this world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing's more common than unsuccessful people with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated failures. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent." So I think that's really valuable because yeah, you've just got to keep at it. Like lots of people will work on a project and throw it away, and then work on another thing, get bored of that, and it's fine to play around for a while and find something that you're really passionate about. But at the same time, you don't want to keep doing that at the expense of not ever finishing anything. So yeah, this game started off in 2013. It fitted the theme of minimalism very well, and the idea was you had this quote and you had to drop words down the screen and then jump up them with your character to reach your goal. But then when I ran the game to test the physics, the character dropped, and I had physics on the character but not on the words yet, and I thought, hey, actually that's pretty cool. So yeah, this was in 2013. So I kept on working on it. Then after working on it for 2 years in my spare time was when I was offered the funding for the concept, so left my job and then was working on it to try and get some. I actually ended up turning down that funding because we couldn't quite agree about like the IP ownership and creative control, and so I worked on the concept and got some funding from the Wellcome Trust and Creative England to work on the project. And then kept iterating it, and then hired a team of people to help out. So it's only been in the last couple of years really that it's really taken shape. And it also has this fantasy world element now. So the whole game is set in the pages of a diary, and you're using words to solve different puzzles. Split into 8 chapters. Each chapter begins in the pages of the diary and then transitions into the fantasy world that Izzy, the game's protagonist, has been writing about, which looks a bit like this. It's about a girl who is aspiring to be a writer, and her gran is helping to mentor her. But then when her gran gets ill, Izzy ends up using the fantasy world that she's writing about as a means of coping with what's going on in the real world. Again, going back to the you miss the shots you don't take. I've entered the game for lots of different awards, and we've been lucky enough to win several of them. There's lots more that aren't shown here that we didn't win. So it's just you gotta make sure you're applying for these things. The game's been funded through a variety of means. So I mentioned Wellcome Trust and Creative England already. We also raised some SEIS investment. We haven't actually got any funding from Arts Council, but they are a good funding body, and I think I will be speaking to them in future. Creative Europe, you have to have released a previous game, so I plan on speaking to them in future as well. UK Games Fund is probably the most relevant for all of you watching this. So if you haven't applied for that before, then I would highly recommend doing it, because they've got all sorts of different means of funding projects. So I got one of their kind of straight off grants, but now they do the transfuser program and lots of work with students, and kind of a great way to get a little bit of funding, and then if you make something cool with it, then you can get some further funding with them, and then they can provide some other support, and that can lead on to getting other funding. So I definitely recommend looking into them. And I think now is really a golden age to be making your own games. Used to be really difficult and expensive, and tricky to get into making and releasing games. But now we've got software like Unity, Game Maker, Unreal Engine, Construct 3 now, I need to update that, and platforms like Android and iOS and Steam, now the Epic Game Store. Always new ones springing up as well, like Stadia and Apple Arcade. So all these new great means of getting your games to players. There's like never been a better time to be making games. And I would say the first thing is you need to kind of figure out exactly what you want to do. Maybe you know you want to make games, but you don't know which bit you really enjoy. So game jams can be really good for helping you try out some different skills. We'll touch more on those a bit later. When you've figured out whether you want to be a programmer, animator, artist, designer, whatever, you can then also have a look into, should you now make your own games and focus on that, or should you try and get a job at a bigger company? Or even these days you might be able to get a job at a small or mid-size indie. So it's really just kind of what different people prefer. There's no right or wrong answer. If you're working for a smaller company or doing your own thing, then you can get very broad experience. If you're working at a bigger company, often you can specialize quite a lot, and you might not just be a programmer, you might be kind of the like AI programmer for a certain character class in the game. There's a certain degree of risk and safety with the different sizes of company, but it might not be as much as you think. Because especially with everything that's going on, like some of the smaller companies can be a bit more agile, whereas some of the bigger companies might find it harder to adjust. And I've been at some big companies and had jobs end and companies close, and so it's not always as safe as you think. And so sometimes doing your own thing, you can have better visibility on stuff and more control. But it's kind of risky either way. So my advice to all graduates would be to work on your own game like there are no jobs, but be applying for jobs anyway. and working on your own game is something that really stands out and makes you look really good. It's a interesting thing to talk about in your interview, and at a time when lots of people are graduating with really good degrees. It's another string to your bow to make you stand out above everyone else. And and if you don't get the games jobs, then it might be that maybe your own game takes off. It's pretty tricky to do, but it does happen. And even if it doesn't, then hopefully you're enjoying what you're doing and you're building a really strong portfolio of games. And then when you do have a job at a studio, I would still recommend working on your own stuff in your spare time, and just keeping on picking up new skills and building on stuff. And if you enjoy making these things, then it's a great thing to be doing for fun still. Which ties into this Confucius quote of choose a job you love and you'll never have to work a day in your life. I think that's very true, whether that's being in the games industry or something completely different. As long as you're doing something that you love, then even if it's not doesn't pay the bills as well as some other jobs to begin with, you're going to be enjoying what you're doing. And then I think when you're enjoying it, you do it better, and so it might lead on to other things, and then maybe it will start to pay its way really well in future. So like I say, you want to work on hobby projects and see where you can take them. One of the difficult things can be getting started, and often people sort of put it off, and because it seems a worthwhile thing to do, it's sometimes put in the work box in people's mind, and they're like, oh, I'll do it another time, I would rather do other stuff instead. So a few tips for beating procrastination. The hardest bit really is to just get started in the first place. So sometimes if you break something down into a really small list of stuff, then you can say, okay, I'm just going to do this one thing. Of like, if you say I'm going to fix this one bug in my game, or do this one small task, then it can be easier to get started. And then when you're started and you're sat there and you're doing stuff, it's not so tricky to just keep going. It's like going to the gym. If you're sort of trying to convince yourself to go at the weekend, if you say, I'll just go and just do 5 minutes, then when you're there, you're not just going to do 5 minutes. You're like, well, I'm here, I might as well do an hour. And so that's what you want to be doing here. And if you can do that every day and just do one small bit that maybe turns into a bit more, maybe it doesn't, but then when you're doing it every day, you're building a habit, and then after a time it becomes harder to not do it than to just stick with your rhythm of doing it like first thing when you get up every morning, or last thing in the evening. A couple of other tips, I think having a to-do list. There's a few different ways of doing it. Like I've seen some people suggest just having the 2 things you want to do that day on your list, and then you can add stuff later. Other people say 5 things. I think any more than that can seem a bit overwhelming, and that can kind of put you off. So just having those things to focus on, and then when you're crossing them off, you feel pretty good, and that motivates you to carry on and do more. Another way is to block out all your day and kind of write it out in hour chunks and show exactly what you're going to do throughout the day. And then if things change, you can kind of move it around and update it, but you want to keep that list and have your plan of what you're going to be doing and when. When I'm applying for jobs, I have a spreadsheet, or now when I'm contacting publishers and kind of pitching these days, I do the same thing of have this spreadsheet, all the different companies, contact details, the means with which I contacted them, because some places will have a website that you apply through, some you email, some maybe you met someone there and you tweeted them or something, and so it's good to have a record of all of these things and the dates so that you can follow up, like for jobs. I guess yeah, you could follow up after a couple of weeks, and then after that, maybe if you haven't heard back in like 6 months or so, if you've got some updates to your portfolio and stuff, then it can be good to send those in and say, hey, just wanted to let you know that I've updated this, added XYZ, so here you go. And yeah, it could be a good way of doing things, because often they get big piles of stuff, and then it might be not actually that when they're looking for someone, they start at the beginning. They might look at the most recent ones, so sometimes just applying at the right time can help. Don't get disheartened if you don't get a reply. Like when I was at university, I wanted to do a sandwich year, and I applied to 5 companies, and I didn't hear back from any of them, and felt very hard done by. Then when I was at Marmalade, I was speaking to one of our interns there. He was telling me he applied to 100 companies and heard back from 5 of them, and then he had his pick of those 5. So that's definitely the way to do it, and it's a numbers game. But yeah, companies are busy, so don't take it personally if you don't hear back. When you're doing your CV, what you want to do is have a email that contains your covering letter, which I'll look at in a moment, and then have your CV as an attachment on that email. So I think it's good to have the job title at the beginning, because sometimes people will kind of blanket send out CVs for stuff and apply for loads of different roles with the same CV, but actually if you're applying to be an artist, your CV should be tailored as an artist CV. If you're applying to be a producer, it should emphasize all the skills and experience that you have that's relevant for being a producer. So you want to take the time to maximize your chances for any application by customizing it for that particular role. And yeah, and the more focus you have, the better. So hopefully you're going to have figured out which role it is you want to be applying for, and then you can put a lot of effort into honing your CV to emphasize all those skills and experience, and then you can just send that to all of those jobs, and then you don't have to be changing it so much. That said, if there's anything for each relevant particular job that makes sense to change, then go for it. So yeah, you want the job title that you're applying for at the top, a little bit of information about yourself, and then you want to, so that, yeah, this was an example I found online, and yeah, you want all the main sections of like your education, key skills, any relevant experience, or even events that you've been to. When I first started out, maybe even now, have an events section, because I didn't have loads of other relevant experience. So saying I went to this thing, it kind of shows that you're passionate and you're doing stuff outside of just your course where you're told to do things, and that you're choosing to go and take part in these things. Same thing with your hobby projects. You want to make sure you've got them listed on here as games you've worked on, and if you've got anything online so you can have a link to them, then even better. and yeah, show you're passionate about games through those events, but also you can list the games that you like to play as well, especially as a designer. It can be good to show that you like a variety of different games, so you could list a few different games in each genre that you're interested in. You want it to be no more than 2 pages long. I would say to begin with, you probably just want 1 page because you're not going to have so much experience. And then as your experience grows, you want to condense it all and keep it in 1 page until you've got enough stuff to fill 2 pages. And then you want to space it out a load and fill 2 full pages. Try to avoid having like a page and a paragraph or a page and a half or anything. When you're actually applying, make sure you run a spell checker on your CV and covering letter. Proofread it yourself several times. Get someone else to have a look over and give you some feedback. And then keep iterating as well. So when you sent it to some places, then after you've sent it out a few times and you've looked at it some more, you might have seen some ways that you could improve it. So keep making it better. Keep showing it to everyone you can and getting feedback. And it's an ongoing iterative process. Even now, I try and if I've got anything else to add to it, just open it up and add it at the time. So your CV is always kind of fairly up to date, and it's not like this big thing. So if you were to suddenly be looking for work unexpectedly, then you would have a fairly up to date CV ready to go, and you wouldn't have to spend ages updating it all and making it look nice and everything. And so then your covering letter. So you want to say why you want to work for the company. So if you've been playing their games since you were a kid, great, and you can talk about your favourite game and keep it brief, but maybe why you love it so much, why you would love to work for them. But then also say what you're going to be bringing to the table, which can be hard when you're first starting out, but I would say just keep wrecking your brains and come up with something. So I guess if you are a fan, that's one thing, and that you'd love to work with the team. Talk about some of your different skills and maybe experience you've had from working on team projects, and what you think you can bring to the studio. So if you can state something like that, then that's another thing that can help you to stand out, because they are hiring someone to fulfill a role and to solve a problem for them. So you need to tell them how you're gonna solve that problem for them, because that's ultimately what you're actually doing. And the clearer you are with that, the better. And the better you can communicate that, then the stronger your application is going to be. So then for interviews themselves, if it's not a company when you've played their games before, then it's a good idea to play their games in advance, do a bit of research, so if they ask you about them, you're ready to answer some questions. Don't forget that you're interviewing them as well. You want to know if this is the kind of place that you want to work for. If they don't treat their staff very well, and people don't enjoy working there, then it might not be the best place. So and also everyone is a good fit for different roles. So the more you can find out about them, the better. Also looks good if you're asking questions. It shows that you're keen and engaged and you're interested in actually going there, and you're not just kind of going through the motions because you need a job or need to show that you've been applying for places. Also get as much interview experience as you can. So even stuff you're not sure about, it's still kind of worth going along, so that when that interview at Blizzard or wherever comes up, you've interviewed for these sorts of roles several times before, and you know what you're doing and you're more comfortable with it. Some really great websites like Game Dev Map that shows all around the world where the games companies are located, and you can click on any of those red dots and then it will show you all of the other companies that are in that location and some contact details. It's not 100% up to date, but it's generally pretty good, and so yeah, it's something good to go on, and then you can look at their website, see if they're hiring. Sometimes even if companies aren't hiring, you can still send a speculative application, and in the past, when some people have sent applications that have been that good, they've been hired anyway, even though the company wasn't hiring. Also, if there's something very specific that you feel you can bring to the company and you can communicate that well enough, then certain companies might kind of see the benefit of that and hire you, and so it's possible to kind of create your own role. Some people have done that, other companies as well. Ukie's Games Map is also really good, excellent because it's UK specific, so and very up to date as well. So it's definitely worth checking that out. And then job agencies, there's loads of really cool ones. OPM, Aardvark, Swift, Datascope, Interactive Selection, and Games Jobs Direct here I've got, but there's tons more I've probably forgotten, and and lots of them now provide advice to graduates as well, and have different services for sort of helping you get your foot in the door. Also having a look at their adverts so you can see what different things the games companies are looking for, and that will help you know which skills to brush up on and which skills to emphasise on your CV. There's also sites like gamesindustry.biz and Gamasutra that have job sections on them, and they're really handy for checking out too. One thing lots of students and graduates find is it can be difficult to find a job because you have no experience, but then you can't get that experience from a job because no one's willing to take a chance on you. Is a tricky situation. There's no perfect solution, but one good way of getting yourself some experience is taking part in game jams. So like I said, Lost Words started off in a game jam, and I've done quite a few different ones. Sometimes they don't always go very well, but you always learn something from them, and usually really good fun as well. You can meet new people, learn new skills, so it's definitely worth checking out. And it's often amazing what you can accomplish in the space of a weekend, because when you've got the kind of constraints of a theme and like one weekend to do it in, you just do the stuff that you really have to do, and then at the end of it you can have sometimes quite a cool little game. And otherwise, if you were going to make that, like, probably would take much longer than a weekend, especially because you don't generally have like a whole weekend to spend on stuff. So when it is a game jam and you've been in you've had that time that you've allocated and you're specifically focusing on it, especially working with some other people, you can actually come up with something that's pretty awesome, and that sort of thing looks great in your CV and portfolio. You can make a little video of it to show it off well, because often people don't have a lot of time to look into stuff, so they might not play through all of the games that people list, but they're likely to have a few seconds to look at a video of it, and if it looks really polished and cool, who knows, maybe they will try out a game. And but even if they don't, if you've got something that just shows it off really well, then it's going to make an impression. There's some really great websites like Compo Hub and indiegamejams.com that list all the different game jams that are going on. So as you can see, there's kind of game jams all the time, multiple different ones at any moment, so it's definitely worth checking out. And not so relevant right now for real world events, which I have a list of in a second, but in future they will become relevant again. And in the meantime, you can connect with people online, so Twitter, Reddit, Facebook. We've got on a list in a couple of slides some of the game dev resources for there. So when things are back to normality, we can look forward to all the different events that are going to be kicking off again, and we're quite lucky in the UK that we've got lots of different ones kind of spread all around the country. I help run Game Anglia in Ipswich, and in London you've got cool stuff like Resd and all the BAFTA events. I really love the Norwich Games Festival, and it's all sorts sort of all across the country. Feral Vector's really awesome as well. And then there's Develop, a big one for over here, and lots of really cool US ones that are definitely worth going to if you can make it over there at some point. It's always you meet lots of cool people, and it's good to have some business cards from Moo or like Instant Print or somewhere. It was a bit better prices than Moo, but Moo's really nice quality. But get a load printed, and then network as much as you can, meet people, and it's good to have those, so that also just to give them a card to trigger them to give you theirs, because people are really busy, and if you're really interested in keeping in contact with them, then you basically just want an email address from them so that you can drop them a line later, whether that's with an application or keeping in touch to try and see if there's any roles available, or learning anything from them, and just kind of maximizing your network. But again, when things are back to normal. So other tips, I would say always keep learning. Even when you're at a role, it's really good to be picking up new skills and trying out new stuff. One of the main things is just kind of getting your foot in the door in the first place, and whether that's in a QA role or scripting or whatever, that just allows you to meet some of the team and work with them and learn how things are done, and then whatever role it is you want to go to, eventually you can then learn all about that, and maybe even I think some people they've been working in one department but they really wanted to move to another one, so then when that other department was swamped, they went and spoke to the lead to see if they could help and take on some of the workload, and they did really well, and then so they then got moved to that team later on when a role became available. So that can be a really good way of doing things too. Some other useful resources for you: Pixel Prospector, GamesIndustry.biz, and Gama Sutra that I mentioned. I think Pixel Prospector is actually having a revamp at the moment, but it's still got a link to the old site on there, and looking forward to seeing what the new one looks like. It seems like it's going to be pretty shiny and nice. GameIndustryCareerGuides.com is really useful, and the links I mentioned earlier are game dev. It's pretty handy. Facebook, there's the indie game developers group, but for all of these there's loads of different resources on there. These are just a couple I've picked out, but it's definitely worth having a look and seeing what else is on there. Twitter, loads of game developers. Not sure how many players. I started using Twitter as a way of marketing Lost Words, but it might just be that I'm marketing to lots of other game developers, so maybe some of the other platforms are better for the marketing, but Twitter is really good for connecting with other devs, so I definitely recommend that. And my final section is on 4 secrets to making better games that you can use for your hobby projects to get them nice and polished. And so firstly, you want to identify the experience that you want to make. You want to have a clear idea of the game and what you want to do with it and why. It can be quite easy to just start making stuff, which kind of can have its own merits, but if you want to kind of make something that says something or has an impact, it's good to figure out what that is to begin with, and then you can kind of focus everything on fulfilling that goal, and then you're going to have a much more cohesive and coherent project that hopefully kind of achieves what you set out to do. Prototyping, so you want to get something working really quickly. see if it is helping tick those boxes and hit your goals, and if not, then you can rapidly try something else. Sometimes even, like with Lost Words, in the process of trying to make a certain game, you end up making something else by accident. So I ended up pivoting and making a completely different thing, and it might be the same thing with you, and you might discover something really cool accidentally. Then user testing. So for a game jam, it's hard, but if you can get that prototype in front of people as soon as possible, then often you learn so much from that, because things that you thought were really clear, people might not understand. Maybe something you thought wasn't so good is people's favourite thing about it, and you actually want to change the game and make it work like that. One thing I find quite often is people will control a game a certain way, like not how you intended, and so sometimes rather than try and change it or like kind of make them play it the way you want to, it's easier to just go with the way that everyone plays it anyway, and and have that be the default way, because then it's much more intuitive. And then finally, maybe the most important final stage that often we don't get enough time for, because you've got your deadlines and running out of budget and all sorts of different constraints. But polishing the game is super important and makes such a big difference, I find. But it does take a really long while. It's all these tiny things that are really time consuming. So it's like the 20% of the game that takes 80% of the time. But if you can ensure you get the chance to do this and kind of learn from your testing and what people like and what they don't like, you can kind of do more of the things that they do like, and you can do all these nice little touches to make sure it's as smooth and kind of friction free as possible, and I think that's how you can take a good game to an amazing game. So thanks very much. I hope you've enjoyed this talk and found it useful. So Lost Words is should be out now on Google Stadia. We also have a Steam page if you want to check it out there. It's not going to be releasing for quite a while on Steam. It will be early 2021, but then at that point it will be out on Switch and Xbox One and PS4 too. So please give it a wish list if it seems like it's of interest. And thanks very much, everyone, and stay safe and happy and well. Thank you.